At wedding dinner, the fiancé threw a drink at the maid's face. Seconds later, everyone froze. I still can't believe this actually happened. There were over 300 people in that ballroom. Chandeliers dripping with crystal. White roses on every table. A string quartet playing softly in the corner. This was supposed to be the most elegant pre-wedding dinner of the year. The kind of night people talk about for decades. And then, a woman in a designer gown stood up, looked directly at the young maid clearing the table beside her, and threw a full glass of red wine straight into her face. The music stopped. The room went silent. Every single person froze. But what happened in the next 60 seconds? Nobody in that room was prepared for. Not the billionaire groom. Not the $500 an hour wedding planner. Not even the woman who threw the drink. Because the maid didn't cry. She didn't run. She just stood there. And quietly said 3 words that changed everything. Welcome back, everyone. If this is your first time here, we are so glad you found us. This channel is your home for real emotional human stories. The kind that remind you why kindness, truth, and love always matter more than money or status. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city and country in the comments right now. We love seeing our community light up from all corners of the world. What you are about to hear is one of the most deeply emotional and twist-filled stories we have ever shared on this channel. It starts at a luxury pre-wedding dinner in Manhattan. It involves a billionaire, his beautiful fiancée, and a quiet young maid who everyone overlooked. But trust me, by the time this story ends, you will be looking at the people around you very differently. Stay with us. Every single second of this is worth it. Sometimes the person everyone ignores is the one holding the most important truth in the room. Her name was Clara, 28 years old. Soft brown eyes, dark hair always pulled back into a neat bun, and hands that were never quite free of work. She had been employed at the Grand Harrington Hotel in Midtown Manhattan for almost 4 years, first as a housekeeping assistant, then slowly promoted to event staff for their premium banquet floor. It was not a glamorous job, but Clara did it with a kind of quiet dignity that her supervisors always noticed, even if the guests rarely did. The Harrington was the kind of hotel that charged $1,500 a night for a standard room. The kind where guests arrived in black SUVs, wore watches worth more than most people's cars, and never once made eye contact with the staff who kept their world running smoothly. Clara had learned early on not to take that personally. She kept her head down, her movements invisible, and her work impeccable. She had grown up in a small town in rural Ohio, the daughter of a school bus driver and a woman who cleaned houses to pay the bills. Clara had watched her mother work herself exhausted every single day, never once complaining, never once asking for recognition. That was the model she had grown up with. Work hard. Stay humble. Keep going. She had come to New York at 23 with a second-hand suitcase, $200 in her pocket, and a fierce and quiet determination to build something real. She shared a tiny apartment in the Bronx with 2 other women, sent money home to her parents every month, and took night classes in hospitality management at a community college 3 evenings a week. Nobody at the Harrington knew the full story of Clara's life. That was the thing about people like her. They became almost invisible, not because they were unimportant, but because the world had trained itself not to look. The evening of the Whitmore pre-wedding dinner was the biggest event the Harrington's banquet floor had hosted all year. 38 tables. 312 guests. A custom floral installation that had taken 2 days to assemble. The hotel's event director, a sharp woman named Ms. Patterson, had briefed every single staff member twice. Everything had to be perfect, because the groom was Daniel Whitmore, 28 years old, the youngest son of the Whitmore family. Old money from Boston, newer and even bigger money from the tech company Daniel had built from a dorm room at MIT and sold 6 years later for $1.4 billion. Since then he had invested in 6 more companies, 3 of which had gone public. He was, by every magazine and financial publication that covered him, a phenomenon. But the people who actually knew Daniel, really knew him, said something different about him. They said he was decent. Genuinely, unusually decent for someone with that kind of wealth. He had a habit of learning the names of every person who worked around him. He tipped generously and without performance. He had quietly funded a scholarship program for first-generation college students that he never once mentioned publicly. He was not perfect, but he was real in a way that very few people with his level of wealth ever managed to stay. His fiancée was Vanessa Cole, also 28. Stunning in a way that made rooms tilt slightly when she entered them. She had grown up wealthy herself. Her father ran a private equity firm out of Connecticut, and she carried that background with an ease that could read as elegance or coldness depending on your angle. She and Daniel had been together for 2 years. Their engagement had been announced in the New York Times. Their wedding was 9 days away. Clara had been assigned to Vanessa's side of the room that evening. She refilled water glasses. She cleared appetizer plates. She moved quietly and efficiently through the table arrangements, head down, steps light. She had noticed Vanessa watching her twice during the first hour. Not the distracted glance of someone checking whether their glass was full. Something more deliberate, more measuring. Clara had told herself she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. What would you do if you felt someone watching you, but couldn't figure out why? Would you speak up or keep your head down and keep moving? The most dangerous secrets are not the ones people hide in the dark. They are the ones hiding in plain sight, at a table covered in white roses. The dinner progressed beautifully on the surface. The speeches were warm. The food was extraordinary. Laughter moved around the room in comfortable waves. Daniel sat at the center of the head table, easy and relaxed, shaking hands and leaning into conversations with a natural warmth that made people love him. Vanessa sat beside him, radiant and composed. She laughed at the right moments. She touched Daniel's arm at the right moments. She was performing the role of adoring fiancée with the kind of polish that came from a lifetime of knowing how rooms worked and how to own them. But underneath that polish, something was moving. Clara noticed it in small ways. The way Vanessa's eyes tracked her whenever she approached the table. The way Vanessa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when Daniel turned to thank Clara for refilling his water with a genuine smile and a quiet, "Thank you, Clara, right?" Clara had nodded. Daniel had noticed her name tag and remembered it. It was a small thing. The kind of thing decent people did automatically. Vanessa had noticed him noticing. During the third course, one of the other guests, an older woman seated 2 chairs from Vanessa, a family friend named Eleanor, leaned toward Vanessa and said something quietly. Clara was not close enough to hear the words. But she saw Vanessa's expression shift. Just for a second. Something flickered behind those polished eyes. Not hurt. Not sadness. Calculation. Clara cleared the salad plates from the far end of the table and moved back toward the service corridor, pushing the cart quietly. She had learned to read the emotional weather of a room the way some people read financial reports. Quickly, accurately, and with an understanding that the data mattered even when nobody wanted to admit it. Something was wrong tonight. She could feel it in the air the way you can feel a storm coming before the clouds arrive. She was refilling the bread basket at a corner table when she overheard 2 of Vanessa's friends, both seated close enough to the service area that they did not think to lower their voices. "She found out last week," one of them said. "About the trust." "The full amount," the other replied. "Every penny." "And the clause?" "Was." The clinking of glasses. Then, "Does Daniel know she knows?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Clara kept her face completely neutral. She moved away from the table. She breathed slowly. She was a professional. Whatever she had just heard was none of her business. But something in her chest had gone very still and very alert. 30 minutes later, she was clearing a dessert plate from Vanessa's direct left when it happened. She was not sure what set it off, whether it was something Eleanor whispered, or whether Vanessa had simply been holding the pressure in so long that it finally found a release valve. Vanessa turned. She looked at Clara with an expression that was almost frighteningly calm. And then she picked up her wine glass, a full pour of deep red, and threw it directly into Clara's face. The liquid hit Clara like a cold slap. Red wine soaked her white uniform, her hair, ran down her cheeks like something terrible. The plate Clara had been holding clattered to the floor. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. The music stopped. 300 people froze. Daniel's face went white. He was on his feet before anyone else moved. Vanessa, what? And Clara stood there, dripping, completely still. And in a voice that was quiet and clear and absolutely steady, she said 3 words. I know everything. Have you ever been publicly humiliated for something that was not your fault? How did you find the strength to stay standing? 3 words. That was all it took to make a billionaire's perfect evening shatter like glass on a marble floor. The silence that followed Clara's words was the loudest thing most people in that room had ever heard. Vanessa's expression didn't crack immediately. She was too practiced for that. But something behind her eyes shifted. A sudden recalculation, rapid and cold, like a chess player realizing 3 moves too late that they had already lost. Daniel Whitmore stared at Clara. What did you just say? Clara reached up and slowly pulled the wine-soaked cloth napkin from the edge of the table. She pressed it to her face. She was not shaking. Later, people who were there that night would say that was the thing they remembered most. How still she was. How completely, impossibly still. Mr. Whitmore, Clara said in that same quiet and steady voice. I need to show you something. Sorry. I know this is not the place. But I don't think there's going to be a better one. Ms. Patterson, the event director, had materialized at Clara's elbow from somewhere, face taut with professional horror. Clara, this is not. Please, Clara said softly. She was not talking to Ms. Patterson. She was talking to Daniel. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression was raw and unreadable. Then he said, Okay. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair scraped back. Daniel. She is the help. She is trying to. Sit down, Vanessa. His voice was quiet, but it landed in the room like something heavy. Vanessa sat. Clara reached into the small pocket of her service apron, the one staff used for order pads and pens, and withdrew a folded piece of paper. It was soft at the edges from being folded and unfolded several times. She held it out to Daniel. He took it, opened it. The room held its breath. What it contained was a photocopy. A screenshot printed on hotel paper, transferred to this folded page. It showed a text message exchange, time-stamped 48 hours earlier, between a number saved as V and a number saved as Attorney R. The messages were about the Whitmore Family Trust. Specifically, about a clause in that trust that Daniel's grandfather had written 30 years ago. A clause that stated that in the event of Daniel's marriage, if that marriage ended in divorce within the first 5 years, the majority share of Daniel's inherited trust allocation would transfer not to Daniel, but back into a protected family fund, inaccessible to any former spouse. The messages showed Vanessa asking the attorney how to structure a post-nuptial agreement in a way that would quietly redirect a separate portion of Daniel's liquid assets, the money not covered by the trust clause, before any potential separation. She had been planning it. Not a divorce she was hoping to avoid. A divorce she had been preparing for. Before the wedding had even happened. The attorney's final message in the thread read, Timing is critical. Recommend moving forward no later than 30 days post-ceremony. Daniel read it once. Then again. The color had entirely left his face. Someone at a nearby table made a soft, involuntary sound. The kind of sound you make when something hurts on behalf of another person. Vanessa broke first. That is private correspondence. That is illegal. She stole that. She had no right. Where did you get this? Daniel asked Clara. His voice was controlled, but only barely. Clara took a breath. Your attorney's office. The one in the document. His paralegal is my neighbor, Mr. Whitmore. She didn't show it to me on purpose. I saw the message on her screen when I was helping her carry groceries into her apartment 2 nights ago. I wasn't trying to see it. But I recognized your name. And I recognized hers. I didn't know what to do. I almost didn't say anything. But I kept thinking, if it were me, I would want to know. The room was still completely silent. Daniel looked at Clara for a long moment. His eyes were bright. He was not a man who cried easily. Everyone who knew him knew that. But he was very close to it right now. Then he turned to Vanessa. What would you have done in Daniel's place in that moment? Would you have believed Clara? Or would you have stood by the person you loved? Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive the way you expected it. Sometimes it arrives soaked in red wine, standing quietly in a white uniform. What followed in the next 20 minutes was not dramatic in the way that movies make scenes dramatic. There were no screams. No one threw anything else. The 300 guests did not erupt into chaos. Instead, what happened was quieter and in many ways more devastating than any explosion could have been. Daniel excused himself and Vanessa from the room. 2 of his closest friends, men he had known since college, followed. The event continued in a stunned and surreal half-silence, guests speaking to each other in low voices, the string quartet resuming softly at Ms. Patterson's tense instruction, everyone pretending with varying levels of success that nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Clara was taken to the staff break room by Ms. Patterson, who handed her a clean uniform with the expression of a woman trying very hard to process several things simultaneously. Are you all right? Ms. Patterson asked. Yes, ma'am. You understand that there will be a review of. I understand. Ms. Patterson looked at her for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she put her hand briefly on Clara's shoulder. You did something very brave tonight, she said quietly. Clara nodded. She sat down in a plastic chair in the break room and let herself finally exhale. In the private suite on the Harrington's 14th floor, Daniel Whitmore sat across from Vanessa and asked her directly whether what was in that document was real. She tried several things in sequence. Denial, reframing, partial admission wrapped in justification. She said the trust clause had made her afraid. She said she had only been protecting herself. She said that wealthy marriages were complicated and that everyone had attorneys who planned for contingencies and that Clara had no idea what she had actually seen. Daniel listened to all of it. Then he asked her one question. Did you love me? At any point in these 2 years? Was any of it real? And in the pause that followed, a pause that went on just long enough to become its own answer, Vanessa's composure finally broke. Not into tears. Into something harder and more honest. I don't know, she said. I thought I did. I think I convinced myself I did. But I was also scared of ending up with nothing. And you had so much. And I just... She stopped. Daniel nodded slowly. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think you should go. The engagement was ended that night. Quietly, privately, without public announcement. The wedding that had been 9 days away was called off the following morning. The vendors were notified. The guests received a brief and dignified message from Daniel's family office saying the event had been postponed indefinitely. There was no public drama. No social media war. Daniel Whitmore, true to everything people said about his character, refused to humiliate Vanessa publicly. He simply let it end. And he let himself sit with the particular grief of realizing that a relationship he had believed in had been built on something fractured from the start. But before any of that happened, before he went upstairs to face the conversation that would end his engagement, Daniel came back to the banquet floor. He walked through the still murmuring crowd, past the white roses and the half-eaten desserts and the guests who watched him with wide eyes, and he went to the staff break room door. He knocked. Clara opened it. He looked at her, still in the clean uniform, her hair still slightly damp, and he said, "Thank you. I know that took courage. I know you risked your job to tell me the truth when you had absolutely nothing to gain from it. I'm not going to forget that." Clara looked at him. "I just thought about what was right," she said simply. He nodded. And then, Daniel Whitmore, the youngest billionaire in the room, quietly shook the hand of the hotel maid who had changed the entire direction of his life. "Do you think Clara made the right choice? Would you have had the courage to speak up, knowing everything you risked? The world doesn't always reward the right thing immediately, but it has a way of finding the people who do it anyway." The weeks after that night were not easy for Clara. There was an internal review at the hotel as promised. There were questions about the document, about the paralegal neighbor, about what Clara had seen and how. The legal team representing Daniel's family office became involved, and for a period of almost 3 weeks, Clara's employment status was uncertain in a way that kept her lying awake at night, running the numbers in her head. Rent, food, her parents' bills, the community college tuition she was 1 semester away from completing. She did not regret what she had done. But she also understood very clearly that doing the right thing did not come with a guarantee of safety. Her neighbor, the paralegal, was quietly let go from the attorney's office for the privacy breach, though the circumstances were ultimately ruled accidental, and no legal charges were pursued against Clara or her neighbor. Clara felt the weight of that. She brought her neighbor dinner 3 nights in a row and helped her update her resume. That was Clara. Even in the middle of her own uncertainty, she thought about the person next to her. The review at the Harrington concluded with a formal letter from hotel management. Clara sat in Ms. Patterson's office and read it carefully. It confirmed that no disciplinary action would be taken. It also noted that her conduct throughout the incident had been described by senior management as demonstrating exceptional character and professionalism under extraordinary circumstances. Ms. Patterson slid a second envelope across the desk. It was from Daniel Whitmore's family office. Inside was a letter, brief and personal, signed by Daniel himself. And attached to it a certified check, a significant one, with a note that read, "For your education, for your future, for being the kind of person the world needs more of. Please finish your degree, then build something great." Clara stared at that check for a long time. It was enough to cover the rest of her degree. Enough to clear her parents' remaining mortgage in Ohio. Enough to give her, for the first time in her adult life, a few months of breathing room. She cried in Ms. Patterson's office. Not pretty, composed tears. Real ones. She called her mother that evening from the bench outside the Harrington's employee entrance, sitting in the October air with her coat pulled tight. She told her everything. Her mother listened without interrupting, the way she always had, and when Clara finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Baby, I raised you to be exactly who you were in that room. I am so proud of you." Clara pressed her phone against her ear and let herself be held by those words across 300 miles. In the months that followed, Clara finished her hospitality management degree. She was promoted at the Harrington to junior event coordinator, a role with a desk, a salary increase, and responsibilities she attacked with the same quiet intensity she had always brought to every task. She and Daniel Whitmore never became friends exactly. That was not the story. But once, about 6 months later, he returned to the Harrington for a corporate event. He saw her in the corridor near the banquet floor. He stopped. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "How are you?" he asked. "Really good," she said. And she meant it. He nodded. "I can tell." As for Daniel himself, he took a year away from the social circuit. He traveled. He worked. He came back quieter and, by most accounts, even more himself. He started dating again slowly, carefully. He did not rush. He had learned, at a table full of white roses, that the most important thing you could do before trusting someone was to actually pay attention. And Clara kept going. The way she always had. Head up now instead of down. Not because the world had suddenly become kinder, but because she had learned something that night, standing soaked in red wine in a room full of frozen strangers, that she already knew deep down. That doing the right thing, the hard, costly, uncertain right thing, does not make you weak. It makes you the most powerful person in the room. This story is about more than a wedding that didn't happen. It's about what we choose to do when we see something wrong, when speaking up costs us something real, when staying quiet would have been so much easier. Clara was invisible to most people in that room. But she saw clearly. And she spoke anyway. There are Claras everywhere. In hotel hallways. In office break rooms. In apartments in the Bronx sending money home. People who move quietly through a world that barely acknowledges them, carrying a dignity and a decency that puts the so-called powerful to shame. See those people. Be that person. The moral of this story is simple, and it is everything. Your character is not defined by what you do when the world is watching. It is defined by what you do when you think no one will ever know. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone or made you think about your own courage, please hit that like button right now. Takes 1 second and it means the world to us. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in stories that remind us of our best selves. We share them every single week. And in the comments, I want to hear from you. Would you have spoken up like Clara did? Or would you have told yourself it wasn't your place? There are no wrong answers. Just honest ones. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded today that quiet people carry the loudest kind of courage. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. We'll see you in the next one. White Heart.